Hola, hola, hola. ¿Cómo estás, mi amor?
Hola, hola, hola. Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú cómo estás?
Bien, gracias a Dios. Siempre estoy bien, bien feliz. Soy una persona feliz y yo estoy feliz, bien feliz por estar aquí contigo. Y yo me llamo Jessie Feliz y yo soy la creadora, soy de Spanish Swag. Yo también soy profesora, profe de español como lengua extranjera. And I am here with the beautiful, intelligent, woke, divinely inspired. I'm so excited to be here right now contigo. The only person with this name and the only person with the game as well, la doctora Cami J. Anderson. ¿Cómo está?
Bien, gracias. Bien, gracias. We about to cut up today.
Hey, look, I need to fill my water. Necesito llenar el agua. No tengo bastante, pero está bien. So we are here today just talking about this question. Are you practicing cultural responsiveness in your world language classroom?
Mm-hmm.
Because education is all about being a reflective practitioner, right? So,
Right.
what are you doing in your classroom? Are you intentionally planning and crafting regular learning opportunities that are inclusive and responsive, not just woke, but responsive to the diverse learning needs and cultures of your people?
Right. And I think it's an interesting question because I think a lot of language teachers will end up like, of course I am. Of course I'm doing this, that, and the other. But there's a lot of little hidden intricacies that folks don't always take into consideration that makes you realize, oh, well, maybe I'm not.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind for me, like, I know, like, nosotras hablamos español, pero in French classes, if you're not talking about Senegal, if you're not talking about Martinique, if you're not talking about Guadeloupe in significant ways, not just these are the departments of France, then you're not really being culturally responsive. And the same holds true for Spanish. Like,
Sí.
how are you giving these students all of this history about Mexico? Pero no habla sobre los afromexicanos que están en ese
Nada
curso.
de eso.
Like, that's, you're not really, you're playing with it. You're doing it for play. You're not doing it for real.
And especially because I think we need to ask this question in all classrooms across los Estados Unidos, right? This should, and across por todo lado del mundo. This should not just be si tú eres profe y trabaja en una escuela con una población negra. That's not like the only hook of this, because we should be culturally responsive, period, across content areas. However, sin embargo, we got to add that, but especially if you are serving in schools and your students, are of color, right? How can we not make those connections, right? We always talk about making content connections with the world and the text and text to text. Well, you have the best connection you can make is between the people en tu clase, en tu aula, with the content. And we cannot exclude the cultures with an S with the content.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's part of the concern that I have when it comes to, because one, we're in this critical moment right now anyway, right? Because everybody has something to say about the ways in which we are including and inserting very necessary blackness, because that's really all it is. We're inserting necessary blackness, and the ways in which we do that, people, it's a trigger for folks now, but it's only a trigger for those folks who have no desire to learn about it. So how then do you make sure that you cannot create a global citizen if the citizens don't know about the rest of the globe? You can't say that you're creating these cosmopolitan students that are going to be traveling the world and global travelers and doing this, that, and the other, and then have them be surprised about the population of people that they encounter when they go to visit countries. Like, you can't teach about Spain and then have them be surprised that there's so many Africans there.
Right.
Like, it shouldn't be a surprise for them. They should already expect it because you taught them to expect it. And we're not doing that. We've got culture as a part of the 5 C's when it comes to foreign language teaching. And it's always superficial. It's always superficial.
Yes, and shout out to la doctora Candice Olivia Bland. Ella dice que está de acuerdo totalmente de lo que estamos hablando. Saludos a ti, mi amor. And so I have to preface this because sometimes people get thrown off, like it should be Spanish only, English only, una mezcla de los dos, or no. And I have to give a shout out to the late, great Chicana poet Gloria Anzaldúa. I have to read this one part. She has a famous quote, this one phrase that says, I am my language. And in one of her essays, she explores it more. Y ella dice, until I am free to write bilingually and to switch codes without having always to translate, while I still have to speak English or Spanish when I would rather speak Spanglish or English or Spanish. And as long as I have to accommodate the English speakers rather than having them accommodate me, my tongue will always be illegitimate. And so this is talking from someone who, we even limit like this bilingualism, but we cannot separate the culture, because she says, I am my language. And so as a world language teacher, how are we teaching language and not being inclusive of the cultures of the people who speak it, especially using that as a bridge to connect you to las culturas de sus alumnos? That's the part that I'm like, huh?
Not only that, but how are you a language teacher that is working with students who code mesh and code switch on a daily basis? Because there is a difference. I mean, listen, look, scholarship, there's a difference between code switching and code meshing.
Break it down.
What you actually see Black students do it is code meshing, not code switching. But
¿Cuál es la diferencia entre los dos?
Okay, so with code meshing, what we're doing is you're blending all those aspects of how you understand language to function, and you're putting it all into one sentence. You're putting it into one phrase. You're putting it into one interaction. So what we're calling Spanglish is actually a type of code meshing as opposed to code switching. And like code switching is when you go from formal to informal. So you go from the boardroom to the hood, like that. Like you know that there's an appropriate for those types of codes, and you switch appropriately. But when we're speaking and we're using these languages in a way that allows us to be able to kind of interplay and intermesh them, are actually code meshing. And there's actually this scholar, and he's fascinating because he's actually inspired me to change my whole writing style, who code meshes in scholarly texts. So he has this academic highbrow writing, but he also uses Black American English, and he puts it all into his scholarly writing. And he gets a lot of pushback from it, but it's part of like it's like, no, this is what code meshing is. This is me being able to talk to you about Habermas, but using hip hop pedagogy in order to be able to do it.
So that is how you make connections. I love this analogy of the wall, like the content, the foundational principles of vocabulary, skill sets, la gramática, whatever the formality, because we have to still have learning objectives, right? However, you think of your students in tu clase as a different type of electronic device. You may have tabletas, you may have iPhones, Androids, flat screens, old school, but you, the teacher, through the connections that you make, that's the plug, right? You have to be the plug between whatever your children bring, right? Not just their academic, we focus on, the learning differences, the diversity with their academic backgrounds. And we ignore the diversity and their cultural perspectives, because when you not just honor like, hey, we turning up for this Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, which I still am all for, like the celebration and acknowledgement, do that. But this needs to be interwoven diariamente, and you have to intentionally plan. Like you can't just be like, I'm on capítulo 2, so we're going to learn about La Familia, and you're not making connections on a regular daily basis with your students. That takes
work, right? A lot of times what we end up doing, and I'm saying we in a general sense, because there are a lot of us that fall in this continuum of how we teach our students and how we expect them to get understandings about language. But there are ways in which because we do it with our bilingual students in the class, where we use them as our teaching tool as opposed to doing the work ourselves. And when we use them as a teaching tool, we still never really learn anything, right? You can't have that one Puerto Rican student that's in your class telling you everything they know about bomba, and you're not doing your own research. You can't have that that student who knows how to use hip hop lyrics in order to be able to create this understanding of how he sees the world. You can't use that student that's really good in graffiti art and be like, ooh, do this for me. You got to be able to have a history. You're not going to ask a student to do graffiti art in your Spanish class over verbs and then not explain to the rest of the class what the history is behind it. You can't do that. And what is the work that we're doing, and how much are we depending on our students to do that work for us? And that's part of the other intricacy that we miss with culturally responsive teaching. We figure, I'll make the student the teacher and this will be great, but you still ain't knowing nothing. You still not learning.
Right. Exactly. And in talking about learning, my whole hook with this concept of Spanish swag is speaking like a native. And I'm speaking to cada profe de español como lengua extranjera. Now, I know we have diversity en nuestras clases y cosas diferentes. We all have different learning objectives as far as alignment with the state or your district learning goals. Sin embargo, what is going on in these classrooms where people have had Spanish por mínimo un año, o quizás por 2 años, o por todos los años de colegio, o en la universidad? We can come back to that part too, even at the post-secondary level. And there's no accountability, because my thing is, I'm thinking about all my years teaching in the physical classroom, whether in Baltimore and back here in Detroit. It was like, oh, Spanish is just an elective class. It's always like, que no es muy importante. All right, but what are you doing to be more than just an elective class?
Right.
And elective classes son importantes también, but I'm saying, what are you actively doing? You have students for 1 year. Some of us are in a position where we have them más de un año. But my thing is like, what are you doing? ¿Qué haces tú? Where they exit your classroom, no one should be having Spanish and exit talking about tres burritos, yo estudio en el colegio, mi clase favorito. And they're reading it or they're getting the points. Oh, how is someone exiting? I have observed profes de español who have passed the state praxis or whatever exam, and they are certificados, yet they themselves need further development. And it's no shade. Melanin too.
I'm biased, baby. I'm biased. You and me both, honey.
Learning is mastering. It's not like, oh, I've mastered and I never can grow and improve. No, pull up skirt, get out of here. It is an ongoing, right? You have to be committed. It's a practice. You have to every single day, diariamente, read and interpret and listen and absorb yourself so that you can communicate that to your students and exemplify it. But where is the standard? And this is from, I'm saying, observations and no shade. We're just being truthful, right? We all know what it is. This is coming from profes that are Afroamericanitos, profes blancos, profes hispanos. I have seen it from across the spectrum. Right. Whether heritage or native speaker or non-native speaker, and still I'm seeing this issue of this low standard of expectation. And I want to know why.
Well, yeah, and it's like for me, it's like I'm looking at that. I look at that part. I look at the way that you're able to talk about Spanish swag, but then I also look at the because we have the similar concepts, right? Because of language swag. But for me, language swag is not the same as what you have, because I'm looking at how do we teach kids how to embody this language, right? So you're doing all of this stuff to make sure they have the pronunciation, but then you also want them to embody it. So how is it that you are an elective teacher teaching Spanish to 7th graders, and while they're doing the ancient civilizations of Africa in their social studies class or IS or whatever they're calling it, why are you not making a connection for them?
Yes.
Why are you not letting them know that, hey, did you know that Equatorial Guinea is a Spanish speaking country? Do you know how they got there? Do you know what this is? Have you ever heard that? I said to the acento, that agreement that happened between the British and the Spanish about how many slaves they're going to bring over to the United States. Let's make these connections in these ways so that we can be able to understand stuff, and being able to get that pronunciation, and then also be able to see how that pronunciation fits their body. So yes, so you can say cualquier en vez de cualquier, but you also know that, but if I'm over here in Colombia, it's a possibility that they're gonna be like cualquier instead of pronouncing all those syllables. And that makes me feel good, because that's more like how I say, I ain't finna do that. That sounds more like that. And being able to put those two things together. And a lot of times teachers lack that ability to be able to teach that pronunciation. They also lack the ability to do their own research. They think once they get the degree, once they're sitting in front of the classroom, that's it, me done, but I don't have to do nothing else when it comes to learning about what it is that I'm teaching. But you should be constantly evolving in all aspects. And we don't do that. And I see Doctora Bland has a really good comment up there too. So I want to make sure that we talk about that as well.
Sí, vea lo que ella dice, es una variedad que los recursos. We're talking about that, right? Que las escuelas compren no suelen tener mucha información de las raíces africanas. I'm going to say estoy de acuerdo, mami. I'm going to say de las raíces africanas y también de la gente indígena.
También, sí, la mixta de los dos.
Es lo mismo en el mundo hispanohablante. Vea, hace un mes yo tuve la oportunidad de hacer una entrevista con una bella mujer de África, de Guinea Ecuatorial. I promise you, 15 años de ser maestra. Never was Guinea Ecuatorial even included or connected. I mean, that's like a whole new world. Like totalmente diferente. Eso es por eso, vea lo que ella dice, es la responsabilidad de la profe. Hay que hacerlo. Hay que enriquecer el currículo. Exactamente. Sí, exactamente, mami. This is what we have to do it. We have to do it. Es nuestra responsabilidad.
Right.
And it's imperativo. If we don't do it, here's the thing. What I love about this, the concept, but rather the impact of cultural responsiveness is that it's not enough just to be woke. I think the last 10, 15 years, the amazing thing with con el internet, right, is that there is this woke, increased level of information sharing. You can learn about otras culturas, perspectivas, experiencias. But my thing is like, okay, I'm woke, but how am I responding to it?
Right. And it's like, I like to use it the way that we actually use it in our community. Like when our mothers like, get up, it's time for school. You be like, I'm woke. But you ain't up there, right? Versus being awake and alert, where you're standing up, you're putting on your clothes, you're brushing your teeth, you're actually getting ready for school, versus being in the bed talking about something. I'm woke, mama. I'm getting it. And that's exactly what it is.
Oh, you done blessed me with a new analogy. Thank you, Lord. Gracias a Dios por ella. Oh, I love it. That is oh my gosh, I cannot wait to share that. Por favor. That is what it is. We have, and then you hear, oh, these terms are trending. This is a trending term, and this is a buzz word right now in the field of education. Okay, it's getting all this buzz and the traction, and it's trending, but what about the action? What are we doing with it? We have these opportunities, and this is for if tú eres profe en una aula física or virtualmente. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You can still reach and teach and make these connections and affirm your students, because here's the thing. More than adults, kids, whether it's de kinder hasta octavo grado or no colegio, kids know who's real, who's not, what's real, and what's not.
Like a book, honey. They can read you like a book.
If you tap into them and acknowledge what they bring, and then connect that on a cultural level, because language, remember, I am my language, says Gloria Anzalúa. I am my language, your language, you can't separate the two. Okay, Friday, we're going to have our culture lesson. No, it needs to be interwoven, because when you affirm my language, aka my culture, aka my perspective, because culture is so much more than that tip of the iceberg.
Right. And it's and a language classroom without reciprocity between the students and the teachers isn't a classroom anyway. It's just a space. It's a listening space. It's a sound booth, as opposed to it actually being something that really engages both the teachers and the students in positive and impactful ways. Like if you not, and again, this is a little bit different than what we were saying earlier. This isn't you trying to get your students to teach your content, but what you're doing is you're gleaning what you can out of their experiences. You're letting their experiences inform your teaching, not making them teach their experiences to you so that you can move on, and vice versa. Your experiences inform their learning. So are you making sure that there's reciprocidad que está en la clase, or are you just trying to be the sage on the stage in the midst of your language class, which a lot of times, unfortunately, we fall into that trap because we're trying to check off the content boxes, right? We're trying to check off the standards boxes, and in doing that, we miss these marvelous opportunities to make sure that retention stays on the checklist, because we will delete retention of the language in order to address these other standards. So, but if you have reciprocity, then it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to make sure that retention stays on that checklist and never gets sacrificed.
Yes. One of the twin sins of instructional design is covering content. And when you cover, where is there room for mastery? And when we talk about mastery, how do we get there without motivation? And if you are not, it's like, let's close this achievement gap through culture.
Right, because that's what it is. I mean, I love them. I love all of the scholars that have spent 44 years, because that's how long it's been, 44 years trying to explain to us how math and reading are the basis of the achievement gap. But that's not the case. The basis of the achievement gap is really the absence of body in the content that they're learning. It has nothing to do with whether or not they can read or add well. It has to do with how they see this in terms of their positionality in relation to the content. And until we actually get that and get to a point where we're actually doing it, like ELA teachers are starting to do it a little bit more because they're starting to incorporate more readings that are more reflective. They're trying to make sure that they're doing all of these things that are a little bit different in terms of how they're engaging with stuff. They're having things like, you know, whether we agree or disagree. Yeah, when they have exams, they kind of, so long as they got the idea, they're not really checking so much for grammar as much anymore. And those are ways in which people are actually including some of the ways in which we function as people in our position to the content that we're learning. But we don't do that. We don't do that we don't do that enough for people to be able to say, okay, cool. So it's not just that I'm going to talk about Katherine Johnson for a day in math class, and then now you've seen yourself, so let's roll. But it's being able to pull all of that. Are you talking about what happened in the 25th dynasty in Egypt when it came to math, and how that architecture is really geometric? And are you studying those things in order for them to be able to get their history and the math at the same time, so that they can actually legit walk out like, oh, I'm royalty for real. And because I'm royalty, I got to get this right. And we're not necessarily doing enough of that. And that's where the gap is. The gap is in culture. The gap isn't in skills. We got the skills. We've been had the skills. We taught them the skills historically.
Yeah. The gap is definitely the culture. Most definitely. I wanted to share. Hay un glitch. Okay, lo siento. No está funcionando. Está bien. Está bien. I just wanted to give a reminder to everyone. You can definitely check out me, Dr. Cami J. Anderson, as well as Jennifer Saldana White on Sábado el 30 de Abril. We are going definitely live in our Spanish Swag 22 virtual workshop. We'll be talking about how we can use a musical mnemonic, and not just, I'm all about music. I'm all about, see, my thing is like, I don't think it's fair to say, I'm culturally relevant and I'm going to just use hip hop for the beat in itself. You have to know your students, and you have to know what is relevant. I always at the beginning of the year give out a survey. Who is your favorite? ¿Quién es tu YouTuber favorito? Tu artista favorito? Like, I want to know these things. So when I'm helping you to make content, what's your favorite show? What's your favorite game? We have to, let's talk also. Cultural relevance is also outside of one's ethnicity, right? So there's a generational thing that spans across culture as far as ethnic groups. Right now, the concept of having students do the performance-based assessments is a great thing. Capitalize on trends that are on TikTok right now. Like, why not? They still can demonstrate, right? They still can do a performance-based demonstration. We don't have to do the traditional old skits that are not relevant. Have these kids actively, because they're all in this, right? So being relevant also culturally has to do with this. Everything has to be, of course, age appropriate, school appropriate, right? We cannot, I have to say the disclaimer, because somebody's going to put if
you got to use Flipgrid instead of TikTok. You can
use Flip. No, I'm not Flipgrid. I mean, because that's still relevant for kids. We're talking about the way they perceive things in their lens. We have to be inclusive, right? How do we measure the inclusivity? And we have in our classrooms, and we have to be reflective practitioners. That's why it's mastering.
Yeah, and I was sitting in a meeting, and this woman said this thing that I've just been running with since she said it. And what she said was, inclusion has animation. So if there's no movement, if there's nothing that is pushing, if there's no tensions, if there's no animation, if it's just sitting there as your mission statement for your school or for your class or for your standards, and that's all it is, then it's not there. It's just still water. It's still water. And that's not how we function. That's not how we move. And you cannot have a language class that is just still water. That does not work. If you are not actively engaging, if you are not animating the ways in which you want to include stuff, we both keep talking about this whole idea of hip hop. If you are not connecting that to the social and political consciousness that was birthed out of the Black nationalist movement in the 60s and the 70s, and that this was really kind of like a grandchild to the
like a byproduct of it. Yes.
Like, if you're not talking about all of that, then why are you including the pedagogy? Why are you doing it? If you can't, it's not just about the fact that you can do break beats. It's about historically, there's a level of consciousness and understanding about self that comes out of that music. So that's why I'm using this, because there's a consciousness. Oh, and look, in Cuba, they're doing the same thing. If you look at this artist, if you look at this artist, let's listen to Negrito, which isn't really hip hop, but it talks about that consciousness of Blackness. If you use that song, like all of these different things, and we giving y'all jewels. I hope y'all taking notes, but that being able to do all of these things in order to be able to say, okay, there's animation in the ways in which I'm being inclusive. And it's not just me saying I'm inclusive because I'm doing number 5 out of the 5 C's this week. We got to do, it's got to be all through.
Just checking it off. That's just a covering without mastery, without the motivation, without that connection. So yo recuerdo hace 3 años, pienso que sí, que descanse en paz, Nipsey Hussle was assassinated. And I'm teaching in Detroit, 8th grade, Espanol. And so how could I continue on and not address, interweave? And it's not just like, because again, we want also the other twin sin of instructional design is hands-on, fun activities that the kids are involved in, but it's not minds-on, right? So it's still not in alignment with that learning goal. And so we were approaching this unit of el pretérito. And so I said, let me extend this. Those kids were able to understand fue versus era. They may not have learned todas las conjugaciones, but we were talking about Nipsey Hussle. And then immediately there was no issue of competing with el teléfono and the internet, because we're talking about something that's relevant, that is in their face, that they are all aware of and connected to our learning goals. They were able to say, él fue de California. Él fue rapero estadounidense. Él era autocreativo. They were able to distinguish this without me ever having to name it formally. Yes, these are the forms of el pretérito. And they were brought into it. They were motivated and they were mastering it at the introductory level. And that's something that's going to resonate because it was something relevant. And I would do this again across, I don't care where you're teaching, because it's relevant and folks may want to fake the funk, but hip hop, like you said, is very well known musically as well as culturally. And so it's like, capitalize on that. That's a way you can help close the achievement gap. I also remember un cuentito, and I can't remember I shared this with you, but I may have. I know I've shared it in a different entrevista, pero I remember mi primer año como profe de español in Baltimore, fresh out of college, 2008. I'm like, yeah, I'm a BMO. I know I had to learn it's not Baltimore, sino Baltimore. No one walks around pronouncing it as a T. So how can I, como extranjera?
It's Baltimore. It's Baltimore.
Right, Baltimore, right? They used to say salt, pepper, and ketchup, like a hot dog. I remember the kid said, oh, you want a hot dog? And I'm like, a hot dog? And I wrote D-O-2. I remember the radio station 92, the 2. I love it though, because it's that reflection, that dialecto, right? How can I come from Michigan and then say, oh no, that's incorrect? Same thing, that's the otra cosita. La misma cosa, we'll have this traditional curricula that's written, and it's normally using idioms that are from España and or of Mexican origin, and or, but the emphasis is really on España, and it's not inclusive for las otras culturas hispanohablantes. And so en Baltimore, yo tuve una población de gente de herencia salvadoreña. And so oftentimes some of those phrases were different, and it's not even, and I'm not saying you have to honor the curriculum, it's a curriculum you're given, but you still can make these connections and include the perspectives of other people. If I say this is the only way to say this, I'm from the Midwest. We're Midwest, right? We say pop. If I'm teaching someone English como lengua extranjera, and I only teach pop, and what if somebody else is in the classroom, they know it as soda. And if I'm like, no, pop, you can only express it as pop. But
Right.
soda is
But that's the code switch. That's the code switch. That's wait, where am I? Okay, like it's like because I grew up. I mean, I grew up in Milwaukee, and they're like a jump skip for like a stone's throw from Chicago, where they say pop. But we use soda. We use soda in Milwaukee. We use pop. But I know that if I'm in Chicago, let me get a pop.
That's a skill set too.
Let me get a pop.
But look, that's a skill set.
Down south, let me get a Coke.
Yeah, right. Let me get a Coke down south. But that's a skill. It's like taking every time we're hearing these phrases and it's associated like on the negative side of a spectrum. Code switching is a skill set. Like I want my students but I also don't want us to be narrow perspective that my community says this. Por ejemplo, en cada libro de texto that I've ever taught, when we get to el capítulo de la ropa, la pregunta siempre, it's driven by questions. I'm all about interpersonal. So yes, question. I'm not just teaching you random vocab. Everything todo en contexto, right? And so I remember clearly the question was, ¿Qué talla usa? And everyone's like, okay, chicos, repitan, ¿Qué talla usa? Do you know how many of my Dominican students raised their hand? You mean, ¿Qué size tú eres? And I was like, and I was taken aback, like, ¿Qué size tú eres? Now, in that moment, I could have just shut it down and said, no, esto es incorrecto. Esto es Spanglish, and I could have shut it down. And in shutting down it on a grammatical level, I'm also shutting down her as her identity because her language is her culture, right? And so it's not like you don't shut it down, but okay, this is one way that some Spanish speakers ask the same question. Does anyone else that speaks Spanish, do you know any other ways? Like, and still be able to
go through the list. Let's go through the list because we also have to be realistic too. Like we can't have this only teaching the Mexican Spanish, only teaching the Spanish from Spain, when realistically, if we look, it's like, okay, so where do they typically go once they have the money to travel? Are they dashing to Spain or are they dashing to Puerto Rico? Are they dashing to Mexico or are they just staying on that 7 in Cancun and not really going anywhere else, but they really want to go to Costa Rica? Like, so like what are we doing that type of intense examinations of the ways in which we're teaching stuff? Like when I'm talking to with my students or my clients all the time, it's always like, okay, so yeah, that's what you learn in Guatemala. This is what they say. And since you said you want to come with me to Guatemala, you need to learn how to use this too. And you need to know that it means the same thing. And being able to know, como te fue. Like, not everybody says como te fue. Como anda, that they use in Cuba. Like, being able to say como anda.
In Costa Rica, como le fue, you use it como le fue a lot. Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? Something to talk about that. Yeah, but being able to talk about that.
What you said just triggered something. Lo siento. Ay, ya casi se me olvidó. Ya casi. Okay, sigue, mamita, porque ahora se me olvidó.
But it's because I use the example of how many ways there are to say straw in Spanish, right? You've got 11. I know of 11 different ways to say straw, or the 5 different ways to say banana. Are you making sure that your students understand that? Because if they go somewhere and they're like, there's somebody who might know guineos to be in the little itty bitties, but somebody else might know the guineo to be the bigger banana. And do your students understand that? Do they understand that if they hear these words, it means this? Do they know how to translate the translation? Yeah. When it comes down to the language and stuff, like are they able to make those connections?
I love that. Do they know how to translate the translation? Oh, me encanta. I love that. Okay, ahora lo recuerdo. So I was just thinking about, especially someone being from Detroit, like making connections acá en mi ciudad, right? So colloquially, totally colloquially, we say what up though. That is very Detroit. If you find somebody leaving out, that is our phrase. No English textbook is going to say what up though, right? That's just not it. But what I find that I'm able to connect with students is transferring that to what is the phrase they say in the Dominican Republic that's similar, que lo que. To me, que lo que is along the spectrum of like, what up though? It's the same sentiment. It's not like a formal response. You may say, what up though? And someone like, what up? Or what up though? Everything good? Todo bien? Que lo que? And que lo que, mi amigo? And it's embracing that, hey, this is what people see. This is what people do. This is how people live. This is how people, because your language is what you use to experience the world. Like,
Exactly. And that's the thing that people, and that's the thing that's the thing that drives me the most. Like, the language is how you experience the world. And if you experience the world using, like, for my adults that I work with, if you experience the world with curse words, then daggone it, I got to find these curse words for you.
Yeah.
Because that's how you experience the world. So that means you got to learn how to say this stuff, and understanding that they get it. The language stays, because, oh, that's just like if I call somebody this in English, if I say this in Spanish, it's the same thing. Well, I like that. I like how that sounds. And they'll start to use it a little bit more and more frequently and more often. But being able to understand that our experiences are very much unique. It's like a fingerprint. So just because we're both Black women does not mean we've had the same experiences. The ways in which I walk in Spanish is different from the ways in which you walk in Spanish. And anybody who's watching this might walk in Spanish. I was just working with somebody in French the other day, and she was like, the way you say that doesn't sound right. I said, because I speak French with a Spanish accent. So moving on.
So,
train your ear to be able to get that, because I understand, the French get real particular about the ways in which you pronounce their words, but you also have to understand that not everybody is going to have that perfect intonation, that perfect pronunciation. So how then do you work with it? Can you say, like, oh, okay, so French is not your native language, and I can tell because I can hear it a little bit, but I can still
you are able to function. People understand you, communicate, get job opportunities, work, study abroad. So that's my whole thing. Like, part of the swag and the motivation through the cultural connection, right, is we know, like, right now the percentage is like 21.5 más o menos por ciento de la población estadounidense es bilingüe, and the majority of these people are bilingüe por herencia, no por educación. This is a problem. When across the world la mayoría son multilingual, regardless of one's socioeconomic status.
That was one of the ones. And that was one of the things I used to tell my students all the time when I was teaching Spanish in the classroom. I was like, so when I go to Senegal and I'm talking to people that speak English, I'm looking at them and I'm listening to them and we're having conversations in English, but I also know that this person speaks Wolof. I also know that this person speaks French. I also know, because I had a deep enough conversation with them, that English was the gift after they mastered 4 languages. It wasn't something that was required. Like, you were able to learn English in school after you show mastery in 4 other languages. And yes, the school systems are very different than we have here in the United States, but that says a lot. That says a whole lot. There are folks who, if you look at them at face value, like, oh, they don't make the same kind of money that my family makes. So, for all intents and purposes, by your standard, they might be poor, but their education has required that they learn not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 languages just to prove proficiency in just functioning in life. Not to get a job, not to be a teacher, but just to function in life. They want you to be able to speak 5 languages, and we don't do that here, and we don't have that same expectation. So that our kids are already at a deficit. They're already at a deficit.
Yeah, and it's historical, and it's still up to what's happening hoy en día, right? This whole English only mentality that's going back from the dehumanization of la gente indígena acá en las Américas. Including lo que pasó con la diáspora africana, like all of those things that happened, it was always this English only in the midst of creating this colonial new world order, basically, and eradicating and not promoting other languages. People have lost themselves. And I always like to use the concept of, I do not want to be a part of anybody's what do they call us? We're a melting pot. I'm not in anybody's soup, because you know what? I just made the bomb diggity.
It's a salad. Let's be real.
It's a salad. Exactly. It's one
we know it's a salad, because right now people are pulling out the tomatoes because they don't like to eat them, and that's why we got these issues that we have right now. It's a salad. Stop saying that.
But we have been programmed. Oh, we're all no. It's así, because when you like para asimilarse, I understand you got to do what you got to do, right? Para sobrevivir. Pero
algo para asimilar.
Sí, pero no debe perder su identidad mientras está asimilando. Tú puedes acostumbrar. I like the word acostumbrar versus asimilar. No me quiero asimilar nada. Yo prefiero acostumbrarme, Por ejemplo, viviendo en Baltimore, yo me acostumbré mis orejas a las pronunciaciones de Baltimore. Like, por 6 años viviendo allí. But I didn't assimilate and become someone that's from Baltimore. I can't do that. Porque yo no soy de allí. Soy de aquí. And equally, cuando yo vengo a Costa Rica, accustomed means you recognize and you decrease the ethnocentrism and the colonialism mentality, thinking it's all your way or the highway, and then you embrace empathy, and not empathy just for the person, but your ears have to have empathy. Like, it's not just about you. Let me be considerate and practice what I like to call woke bilingualism, like responsively woke bilingualism, because how can I then leave the country and then assert myself? That's another thing right there. Assert myself without the swag, without the respect. We ain't got time for that. We may have to plan another conference about that one, because when I tell you, I have met some characters and go other places, make their money, do not care about the people, because they're gentrifying países extranjeros también. Right. But then just not even like instead of assimilating, it's almost like trying to make the people assimilate to you. Because tú vienes de América, de los Estados Unidos.
Your privilege slip is showing, as I like to say.
And that crosses cultural lines too. That's why I'm speaking on my people on my podcast on Black Seed Radio. I know we got a growing Black expat population. I absolutely love it, but I need us to be woke in our expatriatism. If that's your route you're taking, don't bring problematic energy.
Right, but that's one of the things I like about the fact that you've coordinated this whole this conference. Like, we're gonna spend the entire day really just kind of like, okay, look, for real, y'all. Did you think about this? Are you considering this? Here's another perspective. Here's another way to examine this. These are ways that you can be a little bit more intentional. Now, granted, I'm so anti-toolbox because my decades work in diversity and inclusion. I hate the toolbox. I don't get no toolboxes. But I do appreciate the fact that you do need to have these. You need to have these disruptive conversations, like being able to be disruptive about certain things, and that's really what this conference is. This conference is disrupting the idea of how we've been accustomed to teaching languages and how we are teaching languages when it comes to a particular type of student, and how making these adjustments here and there are not going to just benefit them, but it's going to benefit everybody else too. The non-Black students need it just as much as the Black students do. And it's not just about, because I got Black students. Yeah, but even if you don't, they still need to know, because you got to make sure that they're not having all of these ethnocentric experiences in language when they start to travel and start to move and start to make their mark. Because again, if language is our experience and how we experience life is through our languages, then that means that every single step we take on every country with these ethnocentric ideals and this hegemonic understanding of language is going to impact not just us but them.
Yes.
That's not cool.
Yes, because everything works in tandem, voluntarily or involuntarily. Right. That's the thing. And that's what I'm saying with the W. Consciously be aware of what you're saying. It's on the superficial level. Consciously be aware that when someone asks you, ¿Cómo estás?, if you're not responding, yo me llamo Jessica. Because I'm over that. I'm so come on now. Come on, Shimon. And every Spanish teacher knows that and is experiencing. You find out, habla español. Que bueno, I think you told me, habla español. You said to somebody before, I think you shared that, and they were like, right. No comprendo.
¿De dónde estudias?
El baño.
Estudias, mi amor. Because we're also not teaching them speed and rate. That's why they're like, I went to the Dominican and I didn't know what they were saying. They were speaking Spanish. They just had a different rate than you're used to, because you were never taught that some folks speak faster than others. I tell my students all the time, I said, I speak faster in English. So you about to get the speed, boo, in English and Spanish. Right. So let's go.
Right. So I love it so much, everybody. We're just letting you know, April 30th o 30 de abril a las 11 de la mañana hasta las 2 de la tarde Eastern Standard Time. Please join Dr. Cami J. Anderson, myself, Jessie Feliz, as well as Jennifer Saldana White. We'll be bringing her in. Jennifer was the SCOLT Teacher of the Year el año pasado, and she was also the ACTFL Teacher of the Year finalist del año pasado. So this woman brings a wealth of knowledge. Ella es Afro-Latina, and she is teaching Spanish in the rural South. Okay, so she's bringing that perspective and how she interweaves it, talking about how do you reach your students. And she's actually in una comunidad, and the majority of her students are not Hispano ni Negro. The majority of her students son blancos, and she's still able to talk about la Afro-Latinidad en su aula. And so I think that's an amazing thing, and we're going to just all come together, have lots of fun, you know, but I believe in let's learn, laugh, and grow together. Oh, gracias, mi amorcita, lo que dice ella. Oh, vea, somos inspiradas por ti, mi amor. Por ti. Because we're all in this together, and it's just like, you know, if we all, todos somos humanos. I love that. Somos humanos. Y todos tenemos derechos. And part of the derechos, a high quality learning experience. It's not about perfection. It's about permanence. And what are you permanently etching in my mind when it comes to my identity, my language, my culture, my experience, mi perspectiva, when I'm in your presence as a teacher? Virtually, in person, college, middle, elementary, summer program, whatever. What are you doing? Because we're not teaching robots. We have humans that have experiences, unique identities and experiences. And when you tap into that and connect that,
right. We just like for real, just like when we're teaching our own children, the children that we are raising or might have birthed, we have to remember that at some point they're going to be unleashed into the rest of the world as adults. And what did we give them to make sure that they can function well? And what they get in your class is the same thing. And we really just want to make sure that we hit that. We want to make sure that you are leaving an impact, a lasting impact that is going to be a benefit, not a detriment, that is going to uplift and inspire and not tear down and admonish.
Yes. Falling. I could do mic drop. I just don't want to break anything over here, but I'm gonna do boop. That's my balling. That was spot on. So yes, join us, please. Spread the word. If tú eres profe de español, de francés, and notice we talk about Spanish swag, but this is like we're all talking about cultural relevance in the world language, second language classroom, right? Everything. If you have a growth mindset and you are a reflective practitioner, I can go to like a bomb.com professional learning experience for math teachers and make application, right? So I always emphasize the Spanish swag porque yo soy bilingüe con inglés español. And so that's what's my driving force. Nonetheless, if you teach Mandarin, if you teach Urdu, Árabe, Francés, there are definite, like you can make connections throughout the entire time. So we'll be back live again a few more times before the workshop, but siempre es un placer conversando contigo porque siempre
claro que sí.
I just feel like, sí, mi hermanita, sí, mi amorcita. And we just met each other el año pasado. Or was it ese año?
Yes.
El año pasado.
It's a year yet. We haven't.
No, sí, like medio año.
Yeah.
Girl, I'm so happy I found your Instagram. Like, hold on. Bilingual Brown Babies. See, I can seguir ella. Please follow ella en línea. Bilingual Brown Babies. Yo soy Jessie Feliz Plus. I do plus because you always going to get more than what you think you're going to get with me. You always going to get a little bit more. I do it. I don't want anybody confused. Oh, she's just Jessie Feliz. Yes, I soy Jessie Feliz, but it's plus. You always going to get más conmigo. Okay, bendiciones a todos ustedes. Have a wonderful weekend. Spread the word. Let's engage in this conversation. And it's not just lecture down. It will be collaboration, discussion. We're here to all learn and laugh and grow.
Right.
It's not enough just to learn. But we got to get a little humor in there. Right? Because it's a heavy weight. He who increases in what? Wisdom increases in sorrow. Like the realities of some stuff can be really like, you know, un poco deprimido. But
listen, James Baldwin said it best. To be conscious in America, to be black and conscious in America, is to be angry all the time.
Right. Right. Just thank you, Baldwin. That was it. No, as I see. But that's what we got to inject. That's why I'm saying we got to laugh a little bit. We got to inject it a little bit because it can be really intense, but we can do this work. We can do this, you all. We can increase the rate of bilingualism for our students because it's not enough. Oh, I got my 2 years of high school credit or 2 years in college or whatever the standard may be. What are we doing? We can equip our people, empower and equip. Carter G said, uplift and develop.
Exactly.
We cannot just be on the, I'm uplifting. No, we got to develop. Because that uplifting is not going to do anything past the time they walk across that stage and get their high school diploma.
Right. Right. And it's got to be beyond that. And as someone who gets a lot of them after they've had the classes, and I know what they have and I know what they're getting, and now they're looking at me like I took 4 years of high school Spanish and I can't understand what you're saying, I know we're already doing a disservice. So it's not that we can do this work, is we need to do this work. It's imperative. It's a charge that we have in order to make sure that our children are really getting, our students are really getting, our adults are really getting what they're supposed to have.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, okay. Dr. Candice que fue super inspirado. Look, I'm inspired by todo lo que pasó hoy. So we'll see each other soon, mi amiguita. And invite anybody, stretch out, spread out, stretch out, do what we got to do. And I can't wait to see everybody el 30 de abril. And go ahead and check out jessifeliz.com/workshops para matricularse en el programa. Y nos vemos pronto. Chao.
Ciao.